Amidst the cold snow that falls slowly, there is a story that is forever engraved in the heart. A story of love that is tested by time, promises that are left behind, and hopes that never die. Welcome to The Last Winter, a journey full of feelings that will take us to explore the warmth of love in the coldest season.
Winter arrived early this year. The wind whispered softly through the empty streets, carrying the first snowflakes as they danced in the fading light before resting gently on the stone-paved roads. The trees stood bare and motionless, as if they, too, were listening to the stillness of the season. In this small town nestled at the foot of the mountains, life moved slowly. But when the snow fell, time seemed to pause altogether. On the corner of a quiet street stood an old coffee shop, its red brick walls weathered by the years. The windows were large, offering a wide view of the world outside now turning white. Inside, it was warm, not just from the fireplace crackling in the corner, but from the memories that lingered in the air like the scent of roasted beans and something long gone. Adrian sat at the farthest corner table, beneath a hanging lamp that glowed a soft amber. He wore a gray wool coat and an old blue scarf, frayed at the edges, the same one he hadn't taken off since last year. In front of him, a cup of hot chocolate steamed gently, untouched. His hand cupped the mug not for the drink, but for a warmth he couldn't find anywhere else. His gaze drifted through the foggy window, but he wasn't really watching the snow. What he saw were fragments of the past, sitting here with his mother, sharing quiet moments, discussing books, life, and sometimes, nothing at all. She had a way of making silence feel like home. This was his first winter without her. Their house was too quiet now, too cold. So he came here instead, to a place unchanged by time. A place where her voice might still echo in the walls, where her perfume might still linger in the cushions, where her laugh might still float just behind the clink of a spoon. He hadn't come to write today, though his notebook lay open in front of him. Nor had he come to read, though a novel sat beside his cup. He came to sit. To be present. To feel something. Anything. Perhaps peace. Perhaps pain. Or maybe just proof that the world could still be soft, even when his heart was not. Outside, the snow kept falling. Not hurried. Not loud. Like memory, always returning quietly. The small bell above the cafe door rang sharply as the door swung open, letting in a rush of cold air and snowflakes that scattered into the warm room. Adrian looked up without intention, merely by habit. But his eyes paused on the figure that stepped inside, her movements hesitant, her eyes scanning the room before she gently closed the door behind her. She wore a long beige coat and a deep maroon scarf wrapped neatly around her neck. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, but her smile was warm and unforced. She seemed strangely familiar, though Adrian was sure they'd never met. "Excuse me, it looks like every table's taken," she said softly to the barista, glancing around uncertainly. Without much thought, Adrian raised his hand slightly. "If you don't mind, this seat's free." She looked surprised for a moment, then smiled and nodded. "Thank you. I just need a place to sit for a little while. Just a little." She sat across from him, pulling off her gloves and rubbing her hands together to shake off the cold. Her name was Elise, and as their conversation unfolded, Adrian learned she had just arrived in town the day before. She was from the city, here to care for her ill aunt. No friends. No other family around. Just looking for quiet. Their conversation wasn't long, yet it wasn't awkward either. They talked about the weather, about the old-fashioned charm of the cafe, about the scent of cinnamon drifting from the kitchen. Elise ordered ginger tea, and when she took her first sip, she closed her eyes as if tasting a memory from far away. There was something about the way Elise spoke, gentle, sincere, unpretentious. She didn't try to impress, and perhaps because of that, she left an impression. When she finally stood to leave, she looked at Adrian for a brief moment. "Maybe we'll meet again," she said, offering a small smile before walking out into the snow. Adrian watched the door slowly close, and for the first time in a long while, the hot chocolate in his hand felt just a bit warmer. The next day, Adrian returned to the same cafe, sat in the same seat, at the same table. He didn't know exactly why. Maybe because the warmth of the place had begun to thaw something inside his frozen heart. Maybe because there was something from yesterday's meeting that felt unfinished, still hanging in the air like the scent of cinnamon that never quite faded. He ordered his usual hot chocolate, but this time, he didn't just stare out the window. He opened his notebook and scribbled down a few lines, words that came from somewhere between memory and imagination. Little things Elise had said, the way tea could hold memories, the kind of peace that could only be found in silence. He smiled faintly, recalling the way she closed her eyes while sipping her ginger tea, as if the flavor had carried her somewhere softer, somewhere that felt like home. The barista set down his drink gently, and without meaning to, Adrian asked, "The woman from yesterday, does she come here often?" The barista paused, then shook her head. "First time I've seen her." But she sat there for a while. Quiet, like she was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. Adrian nodded slowly, eyes drifting back to the wooden table. There was a faint fingerprint smudge on the surface, perhaps Elise's, perhaps not. But it felt like a trace left in his thoughts. Something small, almost meaningless, yet impossible to ignore. He didn't know if Elise would come back. He didn't know if they would ever talk again. But that day, the cafe felt more alive. He wrote a single line in his notebook before gently closing it. "Sometimes, we don't need a clear beginning, just one encounter that makes the world feel warmer." And when the snow began to fall softly again outside the window, Adrian watched it with a heart just slightly more open than the day before. The third day arrived with a gray sky and a biting wind, but the cafe remained warm as always. Adrian arrived earlier than the day before. This time, not out of habit or comfort, but because of a hope that had begun to quietly grow, like a small seed beneath the soil reaching slowly for the light. He chose the same seat. The wooden table with old stains and a small carving on the right edge. He waited in silence, pretending to write, though his eyes kept glancing toward the door. Each chime of the bell made his heart beat a little faster, then calm again when it wasn't Elise who walked in. Time moved slowly. The snow fell heavier than yesterday. The cup of hot chocolate in his hands became a witness to the silence that lingered and the hope that hadn't yet taken form. He chuckled quietly at himself, a grown man waiting for a stranger he'd met only once. It sounded foolish, and yet, there was no regret. And just as he was about to give up, the door opened. Elise stepped in briskly, her hair slightly wet with snow. She looked surprised to see Adrian, or maybe relieved. Her face broke into a smile, and this time, it reached her eyes. "You're here again," she said as she sat down without needing an invitation. "Coincidence," Adrian replied, trying to sound casual. But from the way they looked at each other, they both knew this wasn't just coincidence. This was a choice, born from curiosity, from a subtle pull neither of them had yet named. They talked longer this time. About Adrian's work as a children's book illustrator, about how Elise taught piano lessons privately. She loved music, she said. Because in music, you didn't need words to make someone understand. Like snow, Adrian said. Elise turned to him. "What do you mean?" "Snow doesn't say anything, but when it falls, everyone becomes quiet." Elise smiled, and this time, she didn't rush to leave. 3 days became 4. 4 became 5. Without plans, without promises, they started meeting almost every day at that same cafe. Always the same table, same drinks, and conversations that never felt forced. Adrian even began bringing little sketches, and Elise occasionally brought homemade pastries. On the 5th day, the cafe was quiet when they arrived. Snow fell gracefully outside the window, framing the world like an unfinished painting. Elise wore a gray coat and carried a small light blue box. "I thought, maybe you'd like this," she said, holding it out to him. Inside was a small music box, old-fashioned, with a tiny reel and a sidewinder. When wound, it played a gentle, simple melody, a children's lullaby that felt strangely familiar. "It's a song my mother used to play when I was little," Elise said softly. "I found it in my aunt's attic. I thought, maybe, since you illustrate children's books, you could bring it to life in pictures." Adrian looked at the music box like he was holding treasure. The melody seemed to fill the space between them, a space previously occupied only by light words and shy smiles. "I'll draw it," he said, "but not just the song. I want to draw the memory you've hidden inside that melody." Elise stared at him, her eyes wide, unmoving, as if this was the first time someone had truly heard her. Days passed, and without realizing it, their time together began to form a pattern. Like two lines that once ran separately, now slowly curving, meeting at points that felt accidental. Elise started noticing how Adrian gripped his cup when he was nervous, and Adrian could tell when Elise was hiding sadness behind her smile. One evening, they sat in silence longer than usual. It wasn't awkward. Just comfortable stillness. Between them lay one of Adrian's unfinished sketches, a drawing of a little girl sitting by a window, hugging a music box. "Elise," Adrian finally spoke. She turned to him. "You always look strong. But I can tell, behind that, there's something you haven't told me." Elise was quiet for a moment. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the snow falling softly outside. "I once lost someone," she whispered. "Someone I loved deeply. After that, I felt like I didn't deserve to be happy anymore." Adrian said nothing. He simply placed his hand on the table, open, waiting. Elise looked at it for a long moment, then slowly touched it with her cold fingers. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't a kiss. But in that moment, the silence between them became a bridge. And for the first time, Elise allowed herself to not be okay, and feel that it was okay. That morning, the snow was thicker than usual. The city seemed wrapped in a soft white blanket, muffling sounds and leaving behind a calming silence. Elise arrived first this time, something that had never happened before. She carried an old notebook with a worn leather cover. When Adrian came and sat down, she handed it to him without many words. "This is an old journal. I wrote a lot in it. About him, about me, about what I lost," Elise said softly. Adrian opened the pages gently. Elise's handwriting was small and neat, sometimes interspersed with drawings of flowers, sometimes containing just a single sentence that felt like a whisper. "I've never shown this to anyone," Elise said. "Why now?" She took a deep breath. "Because you draw things that can't be seen. Because when I'm with you, memories don't feel like a burden." Adrian stayed silent, eyes still tracing her words. He didn't want to break the trust that had just started to grow. But inside, he felt closer to Elise, not just because of her words, but because of the pain she was willing to show. They walked outside together afterward, along a snowy path. Each step left a trail, two lines running parallel through the vast white. Elise laughed when her shoes sank into a deep snow pocket and she nearly fell. Adrian caught her hand instinctively, and didn't let go. "How long do you think this winter will last?" Elise asked. Adrian looked at her, smiling. "Hopefully long enough to keep all this in memory." That day, the city was suddenly covered in fog. Snow still fell, but more lightly, almost invisible from inside the cafe window. The scene looked like an old photo, gray and quiet. Elise and Adrian sat with few words exchanged, not out of awkwardness, but because both were lost in thoughts too tangled to speak. Adrian placed a new sketch on the table. A child staring up at the sky from behind a window. The face was blank, but the eyes were full of longing. "Elise," Adrian said softly, "if you could choose, what memory would you want to forget?" Elise smiled, but there was a bitterness in that smile. "It's not the memory I want to forget. It's the feeling that lingered after." She sipped her coffee slowly, then continued, "There was one night when everything fell apart. I sat alone in the park, not knowing where to go. I wished I could erase everything, but now, I'm glad I couldn't. Because that night made me who I am now." Adrian listened, not with sympathy, but with the understanding that everyone has their own dark nights. And that night, Elise finally shared hers. She handed Adrian a small envelope. "This is a ticket to a piano concert. I'm performing there next week. If you come, I'll play the song my mother used to play for me." Adrian accepted the envelope, his heart beating just a bit faster. "If I come, it won't be for the concert," he said. Elise turned, surprised. "It'll be because I want to hear you, truly hear you." And in the fog that slowly wrapped the city, their hearts felt clearer than ever before.
The night of the concert arrived with a chill that cut to the bone. The sky was grey, and the wind carried the distinct scent of winter. Elise wore a dark blue dress, simple yet elegant. She looked different that night, braver, brighter. Adrian sat in the back row, his heart pounding, not just from the cold air. He held the ticket Elise gave him, feeling the weight of unspoken hopes. As Elise began to play the song, a soft melody full of memories, the room seemed to hold its breath. Every note from the piano keys revived moments they once shared, while quietly healing hidden wounds. At the end of the piece, Elise looked toward the audience. Her eyes searched for Adrian's figure, and they met. In that gaze was an unspoken promise for a warmer future, even in the coldest winter.
The night of the concert arrived with a chill that cut to the bone. The sky was gray, and the wind carried the distinct scent of winter. Elise wore a dark blue dress, simple yet elegant. She looked different that night, braver, brighter. Adrian sat in the back row, his heart pounding not just from the cold air. He held the ticket Elise gave him, feeling the weight of unspoken hopes. As Elise began to play the song, a soft melody full of memories, the room seemed to hold its breath. Every note from the piano keys revived moments they once shared, while quietly healing hidden wounds. At the end of the piece, Elise looked toward the audience. Her eyes searched for Adrian's figure, and they met. In that gaze was an unspoken promise for a warmer future, even in the coldest winter. The days after the concert felt like part of a dream that refused to end. Elise and Adrian met almost every afternoon, sometimes to draw, sometimes to play music, or simply to walk under the slowly melting snow. But beneath their laughter, something remained unfinished, a secret that hung in the air like winter mist. One quiet evening, as they sat on a lonely park bench, Adrian spoke more softly than usual. "I have to tell you something, Elise." She turned to him, holding her breath. "I haven't been completely honest from the start," he continued. I didn't come to this city just to capture winter in my sketches. I also came here to forget someone. Elise didn't reply. Her eyes stayed on the melting snow by the bench. It's not that I still love her, Adrian quickly added. It's that I needed to stop blaming myself. Silence took over for a few long seconds before Elise said, "You know, we all have pasts. But it's today that changes everything." She reached out, touching Adrian's fingers gently. "Thank you for being honest. Because I've never really shared my loss either." That night, secrets were no longer burdens. They became bridges. They weren't perfect, but they were beginning to believe that love doesn't grow from perfection. It blooms through the cracks that slowly heal. A few days later, Elise arrived with a small brown envelope, neatly folded. They sat at their usual spot, by the cafe window where steam fogged the glass. "I found this yesterday. A letter I wrote to my mother, but never sent," Elise said softly. Adrian accepted the envelope carefully. He didn't open it. He just looked at Elise, giving her space. "I was angry back then," Elise continued. "Angry that she left before seeing who I became. I thought writing the letter would help me, but I was too afraid to read my own words." Adrian said quietly, "Sometimes, even unsent letters can heal. Not because they're read, but because they're written truthfully." Elise gave a faint smile, then opened the envelope and began to read aloud. Her voice trembled, a cry stuck in her throat, but also a sense of release. When she finished, she looked at Adrian, her eyes misty. "I think I'm ready now to begin a new chapter." Adrian held her hand. "If you take that step, I want to take it with you." That day wasn't just about an old letter. It was about how unfinished stories can be closed with courage, and reopened by new love. Winter was beginning to fade. The ice on the streets slowly melted, and the scent of damp earth replaced the frozen air. But in Adrian's eyes, Elise still resembled a portrait of that season, cold on the surface, yet harboring a quiet flame. He began to paint her. Not just a quick sketch, but a large canvas he worked on every day. Every curve of her face, the look in her eyes, even the faintest smile, he poured into it carefully. He wanted to capture not just her image, but the seasons they had survived together. One afternoon, Elise arrived unannounced, standing before the unfinished canvas. "That's me?" she asked softly, surprised to see herself in those warm strokes. Adrian nodded. "This isn't about how you look. It's about how you made winter feel alive." Elise stood in silence for a long moment. Then she said, "You know, I used to hate winter. Too much loss happened in it. But now, I think I'm starting to love it. Because you're in it." Adrian smiled, and for the first time, they felt like two seasons finally learning to embrace. One that arrived carrying pain, and one that stayed bringing hope.
The day was overcast. The air was no longer freezing, but still carried a lingering chill. Elise didn't speak much. She looked tired, as if holding something heavy inside her chest. Adrian noticed it. Behind Elise's laughter and smiles, something felt off. "Are you hiding something from me?" Adrian finally asked. In front of the thawing lake, Elise looked down. "I wish I could stay with you longer, but I have to return to the hospital next month." Adrian froze. "Why? Are you sick?" Elise took a long breath. "I've had this illness for a while, Adrian, and I thought I could delay the truth by pretending everything was fine. But time doesn't wait." Adrian could only stare at her. The world felt like it was slowing down. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he whispered. "Because I wanted you to love me without pity." The tears Elise could no longer hold slipped down her cheek, and Adrian embraced her tightly, as if trying to stop time with that one act. In that moment, winter itself seemed to halt. The world around them was frozen, not by weather, but by a truth they could not undo. Adrian decided to finish Elise's portrait. Not because he feared losing her, but because he wanted to leave behind something lasting, something that could say, she was here. She made everything feel different. Every morning, he went to his small studio, painting with care. The glimmer in Elise's eyes, the fine lines on her face when she smiled, even the trace of tears she once shed, all captured on canvas. He wasn't just painting her face, but her soul. Meanwhile, Elise began writing. Not letters, but small notes about her days with Adrian. Today he made me laugh when I could barely stand. He drew the sky because I said I missed the sun. Small things, but to Elise, they were treasures. One morning, as light snow fell, Elise arrived looking pale. She simply said, "I want to see the painting before it's too late." Adrian guided her inside and revealed the canvas. Elise stood still. Her own face looked back at her, but a version stronger, calmer, more full of love. "I've never felt this beautiful," Elise whispered. "You've always been this beautiful," Adrian replied. "I just captured it." That painting became a witness to a love that didn't bloom because of time, but because of how little time there was. Adrian decided to finish Elise's portrait. Not because he feared losing her, but because he wanted to leave behind something lasting, something that could say, she was here. She made everything feel different. Every morning, he went to his small studio, painting with care. The glimmer in Elise's eyes, the fine lines on her face when she smiled, even the trace of tears she once shed, all captured on canvas. He wasn't just painting her face, but her soul. Meanwhile, Elise began writing. Not letters, but small notes about her days with Adrian. Today he made me laugh when I could barely stand. He drew the sky because I said I missed the sun. Small things, but to Elise, they were treasures. One morning, as light snow fell, Elise arrived looking pale. She simply said, "I want to see the painting before it's too late." Adrian guided her inside and revealed the canvas. Elise stood still. Her own face looked back at her, but a version stronger, calmer, more full of love. "I've never felt this beautiful," Elise whispered. "You've always been this beautiful," Adrian replied. "I just captured it." That painting became a witness to a love that didn't bloom because of time, but because of how little time there was. That day came sooner than they had hoped. Elise had to return to the hospital. The sound of medical machines replaced their laughter, and the scent of antiseptic overtook the smell of her favorite hot chocolate. Adrian sat beside her bed every day. He read aloud the little notes Elise had written, now gathered into a single book. Elise was weak but still smiled. Sometimes she slept while holding his hand, as if afraid time would erase everything if she let go. "I'm sorry I don't have more time," Elise whispered one night. Adrian gently shook his head. "The time you gave me was more than enough to change my life." He then revealed the final painting. Not another portrait of Elise, but one of them, both sitting on the park bench. Snow all around, hands intertwined. Elise stared at it for a long moment, eyes welling with tears. "That's us?" she asked. "Yes," Adrian replied. "That was the best time of my life." Elise's tears fell slowly. then I regret nothing. Time kept moving. But in that room, the world stood still. All that remained were two hearts holding onto each other, even as their time ran out. The snow fell for the last time that season. Light, almost invisible, but enough to turn the world white and still. Adrian stood outside the hospital, staring at the sky slowly fading into dusk. Inside, Elise slept peacefully. Her breaths were soft, uneven. On the bedside table, her small notebook lay open to the final page. Her handwriting, now faint and shaky, still read, "Thank you for making winter feel warm." Adrian entered and approached her gently. He didn't know how much time was left, but he knew it was time to say what mattered most. "I love you, Elise. Not because you're strong, but because you taught me that love isn't about time. It's about the courage to be present." Elise slowly opened her eyes, looking at Adrian, then gave a soft smile. "I know," she whispered. Her hand moved gently, touching Adrian's cheek one last time. And in that moment, time stood still. There was no sound, no movement, just snow outside, still falling softly, as if trying to comfort a world that had just lost something irreplaceable. A week after Elise passed, Adrian returned to his small studio. The air felt different, silent, but echoing with memories. Everything remained in place. Elise's portrait, her red scarf hanging on the chair, and a cup of tea never touched again. Adrian sat in front of a blank canvas. His hands trembled at first, but then he began to paint. Not Elise's face, not any specific memory, but a feeling. A warm loneliness, a quiet sorrow, and a love that remained even after its bearer was gone. The painting became the most honest work of his life. He titled it "The Last Winter," but he never signed it. Many asked why. Adrian simply answered, "Because part of me is in that painting, and the rest left with her." He later held a solo exhibition. In the center of the room, Elise-inspired paintings were displayed without captions, no explanations, no stories of illness or goodbyes, only colors spoke. Visitors wept without knowing exactly why. Some said the paintings felt like losses they had once endured, like a love that was never finished. And in that, Elise came alive again, in the eyes of strangers who never knew her, but felt her, in strokes, in shades, in silence. Seasons changed, the snow melted, flowers began to bloom, but in Adrian's heart winter remained, not as a wound, but as a space where Elise's love continued to live. He never tried to forget. Every morning, he still brewed 2 cups of tea, one for himself and one placed on the empty side of the table, just in case Elise returned even as a memory. He began writing a book, not about Elise's pain, but her courage to love within limited time. The book was titled "If I Could Hold Time," and it became something that helped many rediscover what it means to be fully present for someone. At the end of the book, Adrian wrote a single sentence he whispered to himself every night. "True love doesn't end when someone leaves. It becomes light that guides us every time the snow begins to fall again." And every winter, Adrian would walk to the same old park bench. He'd sit quietly, look up at the grey sky, waiting for the first snow to fall. Because with that first snow, he always felt Elise return to greet him. Through the wind, through the cold, through memories that never fade.
Thank you for watching until the end. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. See you again. Bye bye.